Hey everybody, it's me, Hazer, and I'm back from my little long weekend away. It's now Wednesday. It took a little while. I have been I've been a little bit, had a heavy weekend. Did a lot of drinking, so needed a couple days of recovery. I'm speaking kind of quietly because I don't know if you can see the little Raffy is asleep in the shark. So nobody wake him up. I will wake him up at some point and he'll leave. Keep an eye out for that, no doubt. Anyway, I recorded a Hayvering before I left about the roster changes, but unfortunately, I was talking about things which aren't announced yet, so I couldn't ever put it out. All I could put out was that dumb Baby Gronk uh, parody video I made, which took far too long and was probably not worth the effort. Maybe I'll make another one now. Maybe I'll make one about whatever happens next. But anyway, there's a lot going on right now, a lot being talked about with regards to the roster changes between Jake being replaced on the Warriors by Genetics and Quig going to the Kings are the announced bits. There's been a couple videos come out. There's been a Google Doc be written by Genetics. So yeah, just here to talk about that. So yeah, let's talk about the Jake video. It's a long video. Not a whole lot was said. So I'll try and summarize it vaguely. So Jake started off the video with his own kind of monologue about what happened, and then SOT kind of did a bit afterwards, replying to what Jake said. So Jake said he was blindsided, didn't feel like he saw the change coming at all, and talked about the reasons for him being removed. Let's talk first of all about like the way that the move came about, I guess. So the decision to replace Jake with Genetics was made prior to the Masters LAN, and then the Warriors Genetics told his team that he was gonna accept the offer. The Warriors spoke to admins, tried to make the roster change, were told they couldn't. Then I believe they were on their way to tell Jake when they got this information. Didn't end up telling him at that point because they weren't allowed to make the roster move. Then Biggie, I believe, messaged Jake in a DM, and then SOT said to Jake, okay, we need to talk. So yeah, it was all, I think, very poorly managed and poorly communicated by the teams. You should just do your due diligence there, and one of you should know when the roster locks are, I guess, whoever the captain is. It's the captain's fault. Who is the captain on that team anyway? Is it Pegon? Is he the captain? I don't know. Anyway, they're probably all a little bit at fault for that. Everybody except Jake. So, yeah, then they say to Jake, hey, we tried to replace you. We were going to replace you. And apparently SOT sat down with them on the couch, and I assume this is in their apartment. They talked about it. And SOT says he explained the reasoning. Jake came back and made this video after, it's been a while since then, so I can understand his memory being hazy, but he basically said what he remembered being told was about, like, jumping too much in game and having bad body language, I guess, during picks and bans, right? Which, are both things that aren't that good. We know that, but they're not reasons to kick somebody. And yeah, I think Jake felt like that was the reasons he was given. SOT kind of came back and said that wasn't the case, that they talked about that it was his communication that was part of the problem. When they'd first picked him up, they'd said they wanted him to improve as a communicator. That was one of the big reasons that other players who had teamed with Jake before had said they didn't want to team with him anymore, was because of his comms. And that his god pool was pretty small, so they felt like they had to always top 3 for him, basically, or he could get banned out super easily. That bit, there was a bit of conversation between Jake and SOT there, and it did seem as if that had been communicated to Jake like prior to the roster change, and that it seems as if Jake had like pushed back on it, wasn't keen to increase the size of his god pool, was quite happy the way it was, and other people maybe wanted him to increase it, and maybe the communication there between players and the team wasn't so good. Um, and they'd said that at the start of the team as well, they talked to him about sort of improving his comms, being a stronger voice in the team. Because I think that was something that we've heard from Van and Haddix, perhaps, if I remember right, towards the end of last season, and other times as well, that Jake just wasn't a very good communicator, not a good caller, didn't speak enough for support. It's a very difficult situation, obviously. I feel bad for Jake. And yeah, it's difficult for everybody, to be fair, having to go back in and play with a team that you were no longer going to be with. And yeah, let's go through what Genetics said in the Google Doc, and then I'll talk about my kind of thoughts overall. So Genetics in his Google Doc has basically said that he was thinking about / slightly pushing for a change in his Kings roster after Worlds, but eventually got on board with like the rest of the team and just didn't rock the boat and decided to stay together. Specifically, he was looking to probably make a change where Twig went out. He talked about how the rest of the team were just a bit more consistent and all lived together as well. I don't know how much of a factor that was, but Twig obviously lives with his wife. Well, maybe not obviously if you don't know. Twig lives with his wife, and the rest of the Kings all lived in a house with Netrioid as well, I believe, up to now, which is a bit odd. But anyway, the team didn't have too bad of a start to the year, but eventually they went on to a loss streak. Genetics talked specifically about that Gladiators loss where they kind of fucking hard through. I made a video on that a while back. Maybe I'll link it at this point if I remember. I probably won't, but check that out. If I did, it'll be in the. You know what? It'll be in the description. I'll put it there. But I made a video about that loss where like the Kings uber through, like so bad against the Glads just because they weren't playing seriously. And then I think that kicked off, was it a 5-set loss streak or a 5-game loss streak or something like that? And Genetics at that point was frustrated, reached out to Panatom and was like, I want to team together, let's team up. And nothing was said at the time, apparently, but a few weeks passed and Genetics got offered a spot on the Warriors. So, yeah, I think this is the bit in this, Genetics will probably accept this as well, but it's a little bit, like, even if you're frustrated, you shouldn't be reaching out to other players and making like open-ended, like, let's team together things, like I'll join you or you join me. I don't think you should be doing that without speaking to the rest of your team, especially if you're implying that a player could join your team. But yeah, bit off base, I think. But anyway, Genetics was clearly very frustrated with the way his team was going, and I think, yeah, it's one of these things that happens all the time. Like, teams come out of Worlds and they struggle, and roster changes inevitably happen. It's crazy to think, but this is one of the longer lasting Worlds winning rosters, and it's been they were January to July. They didn't even really last till July, did they? Because this roster change was, I think, essentially made sometime maybe early June. I don't know. I can't time good right now. But yeah, Genetics also talked about something which I think is quite interesting, in that he was pretty instrumental in the roster change the Kings made to swap out Netrioid for Hardcore and ADC. Basically said he would do it again. I mean, results speak for themselves, right? They went from a good team, admittedly, to a team that went on a great run and won Worlds. But he also said that he thinks like that change did a lot for Netrioid in improving his, like helping him regain motivation, I guess, was basically what he was talking about. But yeah, I think that was all the interesting stuff from the Genetics thing. I just took some notes while I read through it and watched the video, the Jake Salt video, I mean. From what I know as well of the Kings situation, he talks about this a little bit in the Google Doc. Again, these will be linked down below, so if you want to read the full things, they'll be there. But if Genetics hadn't gotten the Warriors spot, like the Kings roster was already, like, the trust there was gone. And I think, yeah, a lot of people would feel the same. Like, once someone is like, hey, we want to try out someone else for you, shout out Spudio, you basically are, like, the trust is gone, and you're just going to be watching your back and always worried that things are gonna change or someone's gonna leave or they're gonna want you out, and the roster, like, there's no trust there anymore at that point. So they basically said that they were gonna pick up another support regardless of whether Genetics ended up moving to the Warriors, which he did, but they would have replaced him regardless with Quig, I imagine, which is who they got in the end. Okay. Now we're 10 minutes into the video, we're out of summary land, and we're into more opinion land. Okay, let's talk about, first of all, there's a lot of outcry around the Jake replacement, and the reasoning behind it, and like everybody's like, wow, they were doing so well, why would you make a change, blah, 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 blah. I'm not as against that as most people are. I think that Genetics is going to be an upgrade from Jake, personally. Although, let me clarify this first of all. Jake has been the best support this phase, and I don't think it's like that close. But as a general rule, over the last couple of years, he's not been the best. He is a player who does well in specific metas and on specific gods. He is also not, from the outside looking in, certainly, like I say this with coaches and stuff, and you can say it with players as well, but if you look at who's going to have more impact on a team in terms of practice environment and theory crafting, picks and bans, driving for improvement, probably the better scrimmer. I don't know, it's hard to say actually, because I imagine Genetics can be a bit annoying in scrims, but Jake would maybe troll some scrims. So yeah, I don't know. But from the outside looking in, Genetics is probably the better player to have on your team in terms of that. And I also think he probably has the higher ceiling and the higher floor as well, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is Genetics' worst day is not as bad as Jake's worst day, and Genetics' best day is better than Jake's best day. But yeah, I can see how people are, I can understand why people are surprised that a team would look to make a roster change in that situation. I also think like anybody who is out there parroting that he was kicked for lounging around or jumping in game are being silly. I think the jumping thing, by the way, I feel like I'm like shitting on Jake here a bit, which is unfair because it's not what I intend to do. I think he was the best support last phase. I think he is a good player, but the jumping thing, like being told to unbound jump because you're jumping around too much and it is just a detriment to your gameplay, and him saying like he can't do it. It's like a symptom of a problem in some ways. The lounging thing I don't care about, but body language could be significant to some people. But like that's obviously not why he was removed from the roster overall. It'll be overarching issues like comms and maybe God pull. And I also think that one thing that won't be talked about by the teams will be like personality clashes. It probably won't be talked about by players because they don't want to make things personal. But generally, when this sort of thing happens, when you kick a player who isn't obviously underperforming, there could be personality clashes there. But you've got to think about like the reasoning that was given for Jake not being on with the core of last year's Bolts team again, and also the fact that the Kings have decided not to pick him up. So there must be some opinions going about, some talk going about why he's not. I mean, you could put some of it down to play style, like maybe you want a stronger communicator than Jake, specifically on a team like Kings, because I would imagine Quig is quite a strong communicator, although I don't know, when I team with Quig, he can never talk while CCing people, basically, which always got him by there. But that's a total aside. Big Man, I don't think is probably that strong of a talker, and you would want to replace Genetics if you don't want to totally mess up the chemistry of the team and have to change a lot in terms of the way you play. You would want to replace him with someone who talks more, which is maybe why you could say that Jake's not as good of an option as maybe someone else. I don't really know as much about Quig when it comes to comms and shot calling as other people. But yeah, you've got to remember that despite how good Jake has been this year, he wasn't picked up by the Kings. And yeah, that's got to be a symptom of something. Is that all I wanted to say? I don't know. Yeah, that was specifically, I think PBM made it. I'll link it down below as well. Let me read it. Oh God, my mouse. My mouse has not been moved for so long that I went to sleep. PBM tweeted on the RT. It was Scream tweeted like a Reddit screenshot of someone saying, "Awesome Jake 408 and SOT confirmed Jake is kicked due to jumping and raising his arms during picks and bans," which is just like everybody knows that's just nonsense. And I don't think anybody confirmed that. And then PBM said, "We weren't really that in quotes." We weren't really that happy teaming with Jake in the first place, so when we saw another player we liked was more available, we had to find any reason we could to kick him since we were winning so much. They could have just said that and we could all move on. I don't agree with that as a general rule. I don't think it's fair to say that they're just looking for a reason to kick him. A player we liked more was available. I don't think that's a very fair comment in my eyes, but oh well. But yeah, as I said, I'll link all this down below. Hopefully I've havered well enough about this. I don't know if I can even put my other havering. Maybe I'll put the havering live, the one that I recorded last Friday, or last Thursday, I think it was. Yeah, last Thursday, before any changes were announced to, I'll put it live once the adjustments are announced. What we have left is, the original tweet was roster update alert. Hazer Smite was away for the weekend, so obviously time to drop some crazy roster changes. All this mean for our reigning world champions? Where will Awesome Jake 408 land? You'll just have to wait to believe it. See you next week with the E and the U capitalized. So there's some EU related roster change coming. The change that you would think would make the most sense would be Hounds like Quig is gone. They pick up Jake. Will that be the case? I don't know. Well, I mean, I do know, but I'm not going to say until it's announced because. Yeah, and then presumably there's some EU player coming over. Could it be a replacement for the Glads? Could it be a replacement in the support role somewhere? Could we be seeing like Kha'Zix or Preds move over? I don't know. I do know. But yeah, I think that's enough. Oh, you could see Preds team back up with Coast maybe. You know that's not what's happening. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said it. But anyway. That's enough talking about Smite. Hopefully this havering was in some way coherent and covered some things for you all. Again, things will all be down below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you soon, probably. Bye.